Hello, and a big welcome to all of you out there who are listening and seeing this podcast. Today we have a very interesting guest. It's Mackenzie Wilde. Welcome to you.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on the podcast.
It's so nice to see you, and I'm so excited to ask you a lot of questions because you have been doing things that are very up in the time in horses welfare and all these things. So please tell us what you are doing.
So I specialize working with aggressive horses. I'm based in the United States, and I've had people from essentially all over the country send me aggressive horses, horses that have been pretty horrifically abused, horses with a history of trauma. Some of them just have a lot of pain, and so that's kind of where their aggression stems from. And my goal is to rehabilitate these horses using science-based, force-free methods, and I've written books on it, and my heart is really with those horses that people really don't know how to help.
Yeah, and that is really great. And I have had a few horses myself, so it's really interesting to hear about this because, as you said, we have recognized today that horses are not aggressive, but it's some kind of pain they have or a mental thing. Um, so how much is pain and how much is mental?
Well, so it really just depends on the horse. Some horses could be aggressive purely due to more of like a mental type thing. You know, maybe they were pretty abused. There's also science out there that shows that when a horse is enduring trauma, exactly with humans as well, what it does is it releases chemicals. And so when there's too much of these chemicals, it can actually damage the brain and how it functions. So with some horses, it can be purely neurological on why they are aggressive. Others, it could be that they are in pain and no one's just kind of recognized that the horse is in pain yet. But once the pain goes away, then the aggression can go away.
But how about the mental? Can you do something about that?
It depends. The biggest thing you have to kind of get the horse to trust you. You have to do a lot of like managing. Now, there are some cases where the horse isn't necessarily, they may not come back from it, right? But they can live a happy life as a pasture pet. The biggest thing when it does come to the mental side, so there's something called neuroplasticity. And this is basically where you're trying to rewire the neurons within the brain. And through neuroplasticity, this is basically just ways that you can try and challenge the horse's brain and how it functions. And so, basically what'll happen is you can encourage things like doing obstacles or liberty work or things that the horse isn't typically used to, and what that does is that makes the horse's brain kind of focus on new things. And when you're trying to grow the horse's brain and trying to add to the educational base within the brain, and that can actually start to heal other parts of the brain that haven't necessarily been used in a while, or parts that were damaged through trauma.
Wow, so you can rehabilitate the brain as well. I have been reading a lot of neural things in human, but I didn't know that it's the same way,
Mhm.
practical. That's fantastic. So tell us, have you succeeded with yeah, you I suppose you have, but give us an example for that on that.
I've definitely had quite a high success rate. I think one of the most unique cases that I've had, I've got two of them. Both of them were Mustangs. One of them was a horse off the Havasupai Indian Reservation in northern Arizona, and that reservation is very well known for treating their horses very poorly. Like they've pushed their horses off the edge of the Grand Canyon. They've done guided trail rides on horses that are very thin, so they're not necessarily the greatest with their horses. And
Wow.
so when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, they made a deal with a horse trader, that if he sold, it was like 200 or 300 head of horses, that he'd get a commission off of each of those horses. And so Rebel, that's the horse's name, she was actually purchased by some of my clients, and they were lifetime horse owners. But then they got Rebel home and they realized that she was a lot. She was more than they kind of realized, because she would rear at you, she'd bite, she'd charge at you, and like if you were just walking past her fence or her pasture, she'd actually grab the fence with her teeth and like pull it towards her. It was like she was pretty bad. She did not like people at all. So then
Wow.
they started kind of reaching out for somebody who kind of knew a little bit about aggressive horses, because every time someone came to work with her, it just never really worked out. Everyone's like, yeah, you should just kill her. She's just not worth the
Mm,
time.
mm,
And so I started working with her and we actually started making progress. The biggest thing was I couldn't go back to using the traditional methods. Like I couldn't try and use negative reinforcement or excessive pressure, because what would happen is if I'd give a little bit of pressure, she'd come back with a lot more pressure. And at the end of the day, she would always win. So I had to step away from a lot of those traditional methods and practices and actually start using like protected versus free contact and, reinforcers and all this stuff for her to finally start coming out of her shell. Eventually, her owners ended up moving to Texas, and in the process, they decided that they couldn't really take her with, and so then I took her took her into my own hands, and she's been with me for the past 3 years now. And she went from being this super aggressive horse, and just this past fall, we've been able to actually get her under saddle and get her riding. So she's definitely made phenomenal progress from where she began, but she's definitely
mm.
one of those unique cases that took quite a while to actually make some sort of progress with.
Wow. Yeah. But you learn the most from the difficulties horses.
I agree.
Yeah. Have you been able to use that on other horses when you have learned that from her?
I have. I've used, or so the first horse who kind of started teaching me all of that, she was my mare Delilah. She's also still with me today. And she was kind of that first aggressive horse that I ever worked with, who kind of got me into the concept or in the industry of working with the aggressive horses. And it's definitely been a journey learning it. But once you kind of learn these things, you can try and apply all of those methods and practices with different horses as well. And so it definitely makes a world of difference. And I've noticed a very high success rates in that, because you're taking the horse away from everything that they've known, right? They know the pressure. And if that pressure was used to abuse them, then you can't really use that pressure to try and heal them as well. So it's definitely something that you can use with different horses. But the biggest thing to remember is every horse requires different things. And so you might come across a horse where like you know a lot. I've applied these methods with many other horses before, but now I have to throw away all of my knowledge, all of my education, and start over and see what this new horse has to teach me.
Wow. And I can imagine it takes a lot of time.
It can. I've had
Mm,
horses where I was able to kind of start managing their aggression within 3 months, specifically ones who are like more pain related. And then I've had ones similar to Rebel who would take 3, 4 years before they even
mm,
made a decent amount of progress to do something with them.
yeah. How long will it take for you to give up?
Um, I haven't really necessarily given up on a horse yet. There have been a few instances where I have found an option for the horse. So, for example, I had one horse a while back, and her issues were kind of all human caused, if that makes sense. She had
Mm,
learned, or she had been trained with excessive force, but then she had learned at some point that if she reared and she flipped over, that the human would stop giving her pressure. So despite how much I tried, I worked with her for about 2 years, and she would always revert back to that same behavior of rearing and flipping over. And so eventually I thought it was just best to send her to a sanctuary, in which I did send her to a sanctuary. Now she's living a wonderful life, running free and doing her thing. There was another horse a while back. He also struggled with very extreme aggression. But the unique thing about this horse was that he'd be doing fine one moment, and then with absolutely no signs or signals, he'd be blowing up like crazy. And we eventually, what we decided, because the owners they couldn't really afford to continue training him, they couldn't really afford the vet bills. And so eventually they just decided to euthanize. And in the area, we have a super cool like veterinary practice. And what they'll do is they'll actually do, like they'll do a necropsy on this horse, and so then you can kind of figure out what was wrong with the horse, and come to find out that this horse had a brain tumor. So no matter what we could have
wow.
done, there was nothing we could have actually done to help him. So when it comes to like giving up necessarily, it really just depends on the horse. It depends on the situation. I try my absolute hardest to give every horse the best chance that I can, but there are some times where finding a sanctuary or euthanasia is just your best option.
Mm, mm, yes. Of course, are they sick and nothing to do, and for the horse's sake as well, because they don't feel very well when they are behaving like this.
Mhm.
One thing I've been thinking of every time I ask you about a horse, it has been a she. Um, is it special with mares, or do you have stallions or geldings as well?
I've worked with quite a bit of stallions. And to be honest with you, when it comes to stallions, as long as you raise them correctly, that's what matters. So the horse that we actually did euthanize with the brain tumor, that was a stallion. Now he had also had a lot of issues human caused because he lived with several other stallions, and that wasn't really smart for the owner's sake because they would constantly fight. But I don't really think it's necessarily particular to like mares or geldings or stallions. It really just depends on the horse. And at the end of the day, there's so much out there where people just don't treat their horses very well. People don't really care about the horse's welfare. And because of that, we can get a lot of horses of just all breeds, genders, etc. that just they fall on really hard times.
Mm. Yes, and sometimes it's easier for the owner to say, "Yeah, there's nothing to do, just get
Mhm.
away with the horse."
Yeah.
Have you ever had a horse where it's the hormones that are spooky?
Yes, actually. So there was a horse that I knew a while back, and she also struggled with extreme aggression. And come to find out, she actually had tumors on her ovaries. And so when we found this out, we actually were able to do a procedure with the vet to have her ovaries removed. And this is a practice that they don't do very commonly. It's something that they actually try not to do. But once those ovaries were removed, it was like night and day. She went from being this aggressive horse to one that you could just hop on and go trail riding on. And so that was something that was purely with pain. It was purely a hormonal issue, and it
Yeah.
definitely changed the entire course of that horse's life.
Wow. Yeah. But because I often think with the mass, you know yourself, you're a woman, and that it can be a big issue with the seasons and all these things, and also for a stallion with hormones. Um, so, is there any treatment for a stallion with a lot of hormones, or what do you do with that?
With stallions, one very common practice is to geld them because if they've got a
Mm,
lot of hormones and the testosterone's going through their body, this can be one of the things that makes them violent. Now, the biggest thing with stallions is that you have to learn to handle them correctly because a lot of people, what they do is they turn this stud out to pasture, and then when they're ready to have this horse start breeding, basically every time that stallion's caught or handled, then they have to breed, right? They have to do something. And so because of that, then their natural instinct is to breed, 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 and then they become unhandleable because the only time that they are handled is when it's time to, get a little bit spicy. And so
mm,
it's important that you handle stallions correctly because if from day one you're loving on them, you're, teaching them to pick up all 4 feet, then that's already going to make that horse 10 times more likely to be a nice, calm, level headed stallion when they're an adult. But there are some stallions that just don't need to have their balls, and in that case, you do just geld them because maybe they have conformational issues, or maybe they do have behavioral issues. And at the end of the day, it just all comes down to the chemicals and the hormones and everything within the horse.
mm, that's right. So do you have your own farm? Do you take the horses home to you, or how do you work?
Yes. So I own my own equine facility in northern Arizona. And so I'll do a mix of two things. First off, I have my herd of horses, and they're just a bunch of misfits that I've trained and rehabilitated over the years. And then some of the other things I'll do is I'll typically have like 30, 60, 90 days with horses. And those are basically just horses that typically need to be started under saddle or some other little thing that needs to be worked on. And I typically have about two project horses in, and they're the ones that typically struggle with the most aggression. The reason why I have clients on top of that is because it's hard to make money when you're just working on the long term projects.
Mm,
But I'll have anywhere from 2 to 3 long term projects, and sometimes those can last me a few months, sometimes they can last me a few years. But they're mainly the horses that do struggle with that aggression because my goal is to really help those horses. I just have to make sure I can afford to do it, and that's where all the other client horses come in as well.
mm. Yeah, that's a lot of work. Yeah.
It's
So, yeah, how did it started? Why did you start to to do this work with the horses?
So I've been around horses throughout the entirety of my life. It's just, it's just been, I grew up with them, and so I really don't know a life outside of them. And I kind of came from a pretty damaged childhood myself. I ended up leaving home at 15 due to a lot of family issues. And so with that also came a lot of trauma and pent up anger on my own. And so I came across this Mustang, and her name was Delilah. I actually have a book out there written just about her and how she kind of got me started on the path to working with aggressive horses. But I was in a very dark place, and this horse was extremely aggressive. And at the time, my thought was that if she killed me, then it wasn't suicide. And she had actually had one fatality by herself already. Lots of different homes. She'd been passed around because of how
Mm.
aggressive she was. And as much as I kind of wanted her to end me at the time, I'm in a much better place now. She just kind of refused to do it. Yeah, she sent me to the ER in the hospital, but she just wouldn't make like any progress. But she was still violent, if that makes sense. And so then what I was able to do is I started experimenting with a bunch of different methods because I was just at a loss for what to do. I was like 15, 16 at the time, trying to work with this horse, and I had never worked with a horse as dangerous or aggressive as her before. And so it was a process. And then she started to make progress with all of these positive reinforcement methods. And then I kind of went down the rabbit hole and started learning about learning theory and equine neurology and all of these fun, exciting things. And eventually she started to come around as well. And she was really the horse that put me on the path to working with aggressive horses because I had so much success with her. I learned a lot, and I could relate to her in ways that I couldn't necessarily relate to other horses. And so that just made our bond a lot greater. And it also just put me on the path to doing what I love and working with horses like her.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But one thing I also think about that is when people have an aggressive horse and they come to you with the horse is also moving from their safe home and to you. Uh,
Mhm.
can it be worse when they come with a horse, or how is that function?
Moving around definitely doesn't help the horse for sure because now they're having to adjust to a new place, a new environment, a new routine, new horses. So moving around a lot definitely doesn't help. However, sometimes it's what needs to be done. Like there are some times where someone nearby has an aggressive horse, and I actually recommend that I go over to their place instead so that the horse is still around their owner, still around their handler. But sometimes a horse needs something more consistent than being worked with 2 to 3 times a week. And so that horse will come to my facility. There's also a lot of times where people will just surrender their horses to me because they know it's going to be a very lengthy process. And so then that horse will likely be with me for, several months, maybe even several years, just hoping to make that progress. So it really just depends. And at the end of the day, my goal is to find horses forever homes. I don't want them to feel like I don't want them to move around a lot because the issue that I come across with a lot of aggressive horses and a lot of problem horses is that they're passed around from home to home to home to home all the time. And it's not good for the horses because they can't ever rest. They can't ever find that safety or stability that they need to actually start working through some of their issues.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And how is it? I'm also thinking you get a horse that it's aggressive and you get it on the right path. How is it when they get home again? Do this come back, or do you also treat the human and teach them what to do?
So the goal is to work with both the horse and the human because I can work with the horse all day long, but if the human doesn't learn along with it, then the horse is going to revert to some of the same bad habits. And so one of the things that I require for any horse that comes in my program is that the handler, the owner, is supposed to come and work with their horse because I'll offer free lessons. They're supposed to come and do those lessons at least twice a month, but I offer them every week if the owner wants it, so that way they're learning alongside their horse as well. And if the owner is unwilling to do that, oftentimes I will decline them as a client because I don't want to work so hard with this horse only to watch it all kind of go down the drain. The other thing that I'll do when I start sending horses home, like if they were on site with me, is I'll kind of do something a little bit like very hands-on. So for example, I send the horse home and then I go and I work with the horse and their handler 3 days a week. And then eventually I'll do that for a month or two. And then I'll go to working with the horse like 2 days a week. And eventually I reach a point where I'm either I've passed it on to the handler themselves, and they can do it, from that point forward. I'm still there as a support, but they've gained the knowledge necessary to work with their horse. But that way, it's kind of like it's a nice ease back into their old life, where they're still learning their training, and they're still remembering the things that they've been taught, but at the same time starting to get back into more of a normal type situation.
Mm. Yeah. And I'm thinking about you. You must have found a lot of new ways to do this. Is it all in your book, or you just talk about the horse?
A lot of it is definitely in my books. So my first book was about it's called Rebelling Against Tradition, and basically it was talking about how all of these traditional methods are no longer as valid as we once thought they were. They're not as humane, and I kind of briefly touch upon the subject, and then I have my memoir, and then after that I've got like a book, and it's literally just all about the neurology behind horses and trauma on the brain and stuff like that. When it comes to everything that I've learned, I definitely have quite a bit on my social medias, and I just share a bunch of it on there. I'll share like ways that I train. I'll share different methods or things that I've learned. I'll talk about learning theory or the quadrants of operant conditioning, and basically everything I learn, I kind of put on my social medias, because I feel like unshared knowledge is useless knowledge, right? I want to educate people, because if I want to do better for the horse, I have to teach other people how to do better by their horses as well. So I definitely try and put a lot of it out into the world. And one of my goals in the near future is to hopefully make like an online academy, so that people from all over the world can pay like a monthly subscription. They can go through some of these courses. They can have some really in-depth conversations with me, or maybe some other professionals, and really learn how to expand their horsemanship and do better for their horses as well.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Yeah, that would be a very good thing. I'm from Europe, and when I was young, it was just that you go to a riding school and you were put on the horse and you just ride, and the horse are going to do what you're telling them. And then when I was a young girl, it came from USA, all this Parelli and all these things, and we tried with that. And it seems like the whole world are turning around right now, because you have everybody open their eyes. Yeah, a horse can also have a bad back or something like that, and you haven't thought in that way before. Uh, do you think that the better way is coming now?
I do think that it's starting to arrive more in the world. So, like for example, you're starting to see a lot more bitless riding. One
Mm,
very big event that we have is the Renaissance Festival, and that travels all throughout the United States. And what they do is an event called jousting. And so basically they go back in times, and they'll joust. And they used to always have these big harsh bits, but now they're all bitless, which I think is very good to see. I've
yeah.
seen a lot more jumpers doing like hunter jumpers, show jumping, who are barefoot, which is another very nice thing to see. So I'm starting to notice a lot more people stepping away from the traditional methods, which I feel is very smart. There's a lot more people asking why their horse is doing the things they're doing, instead of just accepting what everybody tells them to. Now, obviously, there's definitely still going to be some of those people who are stuck on those traditional methods, but you're definitely seeing a lot more of it coming out. You're seeing a lot more people trying to learn more and learn different, better ways of doing things.
Mm. Yeah, I feel the same way, and definitely the internet has done a big thing that people can get knowledge from people like you, and they can think for themselves, as you said. Sometimes we don't do that. We just listen to others and think, yeah, they are much more. They have been with horses for many years, so they know more than me. But sometimes you have to think yourself as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, is there anything more you would like to tell the people out there?
I think the biggest or a couple big things, don't give up on your horse. Like sometimes there is a necessary moment where you need to rehome your horse. But when it comes to rehoming your horse, you should make sure that every option has been exhausted first, right? You need to make sure that there's no pain going on. Like if your horse is having problems, get to the root of the problem. Don't just give up on that horse because every horse has something to teach you, whether you learn something new medically or you learn a new training method. There's always something that every single horse can teach you. And so at that point, don't just give up on them. Try and figure out why they're doing the things that they're doing. Why they're acting that way or what necessarily is going on. And once you can find out what the root of the problem is, then you can work on actually fixing the problem. So keep working with your horse. Always listen to your horse. You know, oftentimes, whatever a horse is doing, they're doing because they feel it's necessary. And horses are very here and now creatures. They don't have a very large developed prefrontal cortex, so they can't really think very far ahead or think very much about the past. And so, because of that, whatever they're doing in that moment, they're doing because somewhere their brain or their body feels that it's necessary. So, listen to your horse when they're doing something. You know, if they're bucking when you ask them to canter, maybe there's something going on there. If they're trying to nip at you when you're cinching them up, maybe they have ulcers. There's a lot of things that could be going on that you should kind of just dive into and look into. And on top of that, never be afraid to ask for help. You know, there's many different trainers out there. You kind of just have to find the trainer that works for you. You know, if you're somebody who kind of wants to learn more of the kinder methods, finding somebody who's like a rough and tumble cowboy probably isn't the right trainer for you. But there's lots of resources out there for you to find the right trainer and find one who's willing to help you and your horse succeed. So it's very important that you just keep looking for help wherever you can find it and always keep learning. Like nobody will ever know everything about horses. So, you know, you might know a fair bit, but if you start doing research and start learning and you always learn more, then you will just be that much more successful and you'll just be doing so much more for your horse than if you were to just think that you know everything.
Mm, wise words, really, really. And as I say, look at yourself as well
Agreed.
before you judge the horse. There's
Mhm.
many things you can change there as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. How many horses do you have now?
So in my own personal herd, I've got 5 horses. It's quite a bit, but I've got the one that I wrote my memoir about, Delilah, and then I have Rebel, the gray that I was talking about earlier, and then I also have a few other horses that very similar to the other two. They come from pretty damaged backgrounds, and the chances of me being able to safely rehome them aren't quite there. So what I use is I use them to teach clinics, to teach lessons all over the US so that I'll kind of teach people how to work with aggressive horses, or I'll teach people things such as liberty work. And so, you know, they have a greater purpose when it comes to my business because they not only have they come from damaged backgrounds, but now they are able to educate other people on different training methods and ways that you can work through problems.
That's great. That's great. They really have a purpose now.
Mhm.
Fantastic. Yeah. As we were talking about before, mostly people say, "Oh, yeah, okay, just send them away instead of learn from them." That's a great thing.
Well, and I think a very powerful thing too is that horses reflect their handlers. And I feel like that's a very scary thing for a lot of people to think because when horses in the wild, their hearts sync with the ones around them. And so if one horse's heart starts racing, then they all start racing. Well, it's the exact same thing with humans. Like if you're nervous or if you're angry, that horse is going to sense that. They're going to know that. And so sometimes that horse is going to tell you things about yourself that you might be in denial or you don't even know that you have, right? They might be a little bit angry because they know that you have anger issues, and in your mind, oh, I don't have anger issues. Well, now you realize that you do. So a horse is a reflection of who you are as a person, and I feel like some people are so that they don't necessarily like that. They're afraid to kind of see themselves reflected in front of them. They don't want to see what they look like in the mirrors, you know, per se, but that's what horses do. That they're very insightful creatures. They teach you things about yourself, and it's again, it's just another good reason to listen to that horse because they're going to teach you about all kinds of things for them, but
Mm.
for yourself as well.
Yeah, they're great teachers and therapists as well for people who need
Agreed.
that. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. I really enjoyed listen to this, because there's not many people that doing this. Yeah, there's a lot of people who teach horses, but when they are that aggressive, hardly anybody wants to take care of them. So it's fantastic. And I think also that all your knowledge, yeah, please share it. Make this course you're talking about or membership group, and get it out to people, because we really need it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Um, if you're somebody who's thinking about getting into working with aggressive horses, a few things I want to say: be careful and work underneath somebody else, because there's a huge danger factor when it does come to these things. Like I've had my fair share of injuries, and so if you want to do this, there's definitely a great need for working with aggressive horses, because there's just not everybody wants to do it, and rightfully so. It's very dangerous. But if you do feel like you have a calling, find somebody who can teach you something, and start small. Maybe you start with a horse that just has a minor bucking issue, and eventually you start expanding your knowledge to the point where you can work with a horse who has a few more issues than that. Start small, work with other people, and at the end of the day, make safety your first priority, because you cannot help other horses if you are stuck in a wheelchair or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you so much for your words. That's fantastic to talking to you, and I hope
Thank you.
everybody out there also think that it's really really nice to hear that there are people who take care of these horses, because a horse is not aggressive because they want to be aggressive. There is something behind there.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much for coming here today, and thank you all of you out there who have been listening and seeing this. And I would like to also put your links here, so people can buy your book if they want to know more, and can get in touch with you. So I will place them also afterwards here. So thank you very much, and please subscribe to this channel, because we are going to talk to a lot of more people with good behaviors and good ways to keep their horses. So thank you very much for today, and see you later out there.